Today we're going to talk about the safe food handler and what people in the kitchen need to do in order to keep food safe. So I know we've kind of gone over some of these things before. Ways that a food handler can contaminate food if they're working while they have a foodborne illness. If they have wounds or boils that contain a pathogen. They sneeze or cough in the workplace over food or food contact surfaces. Could be that they have contact with a person at home who is sick and they can be a carrier of that illness. They use the restroom and do not wash their hands. They have symptoms such as diarrhea, vomiting, or jaundice. So this photograph shows the person doing just about everything they can wrong. Anytime you scratch your scalp, touch your hair, wipe or touch your nose, rub an ear, touching a pimple or infected wound, wearing a dirty uniform, coughing or sneezing into the hand, spitting in the operation. Okay, so go back to that for a second. So anytime for most of these things, the solution is if you see yourself doing this or catch yourself doing this, you got to wash your hands before you can keep working with work or with food. Diseases that are not transmitted through food. So if you have staff with HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, hepatitis B or C, these are not foodborne illnesses. So the Americans with Disabilities Act provides employees with civil rights protections. They can't be fired or transferred because of having one of those diseases. And it's up to the employer to maintain that employee confidentiality. So a good personal hygiene program is when managers have to focus on creating personal hygiene policies. Training their food handlers on personal hygiene policy and then retraining them regularly. Anybody here in the cost control class? Okay, this should sound a little bit familiar. Modeling correct behavior at all times. So as a manager, if you're going in and tasting food, you want to make sure you do it in the proper way. Don't stick your hand into a container of food. Use a tasting spoon. Supervising food safety practices. Keep your eyes open when you're in the kitchen. Revising personal hygiene policies when laws or signs change. So whenever we were going to reopen after the first wave of COVID, we had to install all sorts of new devices. We had the hand sanitizers at the doors, which are still there. We put in sanitizer stations in all of the kitchens. We bought a new chemical that made it easier to clean and sanitize in the kitchens. Okay, hand washing. So that's the most important thing, is to be able to wash your hands properly and when you need to. So the first thing is where we wash our hands. We have several different types of sinks in a kitchen, and there are sinks that are designated just for hand washing. So we don't ever wash our hands in sinks that we call a prep sink. That's where you would wash food to prepare it. In your dishwashing sinks, that's where you're washing your dishes. You're not washing your hands there. Or sinks that are used for discarding wastewater, which most of those are on the floor, so you have to like bend down to wash your hands there. So the actual hand washing procedure is 5 steps. You have to know these 5 steps in order. The whole process should take at least 20 seconds. So step 1 is wetting your hands and arms using running warm water. And that's exactly what it should feel like. It should feel warm to you. It shouldn't feel boiling hot. The temperature of the water is just to help the soap. So it just needs to be warm. It's not intended to be super hot. Get your hands wet. Apply soap enough to build up a good lather. You'll be able to tell if you have enough soap or not. You need to get enough lather to actually get all of the dirt off of your hands. Then you're going to scrub your hands and arms vigorously for 10 to 15 seconds, cleaning the fingertips, under the fingernails, and between the fingers. For that time period of 10 to 15 seconds, you've got to work on scrubbing your hands and arms. And we're going to rinse the hands and arms using running water, as opposed to walking up to a pot sink. When you have a pot sink, you have one with the detergent in it, one with water for rinsing, and one for sanitizing. You don't dip your hands into the wash sink and then dip them into the rinse sink. It has to be running water. And then finally, you have to dry your hands and arms. You can use either a single-use paper towel, or you can have some type of hand dryer, whether it's blowing warm air or high-speed cool air, some way to get your hands dry. Okay. Now, I've mentioned this before. Avoid contaminating your clean hands. So if you're in the restroom, consider using the paper towel to turn off the faucet and to open the door. It can be tricky sometimes because there may not be a trash can located near the door for you to put the paper towel in. Okay, so when do we wash hands? Food handlers must wash their hands before preparing food, working with clean equipment and utensils, and putting on single-use gloves. So anytime you're planning to do one of these things, you got to start off with washing your hands. Of course, we wash our hands after we use the restroom. After you touch the body or your body or any clothing, coughing, sneezing, blowing the nose, using a handkerchief or tissue, any of those times. Eating, drinking, smoking, chewing gum or tobacco. Handling soiled items. So if you're taking out dirty side towels, or if you're taking out the trash. Anytime after you use or handle raw meat, seafood, or poultry. Taking out the garbage. Also, after handling service or aquatic animals, you might know what a service animal is. Like a companion animal that somebody blind might have, a seeing eye dog. You're not supposed to approach them. But if you would have to, you have to wash your hands after that, of course. Handling chemicals that might affect food safety. So if you were cleaning with some type of cleaner, sanitizer, you want to wash your hands after that. Whenever you change your tasks and before you begin a new task, make sure you wash your hands. Leaving and returning to the kitchen or prep area. So anytime you'd have to go outside of the kitchen for whatever reason, come back in, you're gonna have to wash your hands. After you handle money, and using electronic devices. I don't know if anybody's presented studies to you before, but your cell phones, your iPads, those kind of things have more bacteria than a public toilet. If the public toilets get washed and cleaned at least a couple of times a week, but people don't clean and sanitize their cell phones. And then the coverall, touching anything that could possibly contaminate your hands. So I'm using the computer up here, I'm touching the desktop. I would definitely have to wash my hands. So, corrective action. If food handlers have touched food or food contact surface with unclean hands, so let's say they came back from taking out the trash and forgot to wash their hands, then any food that they've been working with since they came back from taking out the trash would have to be thrown away. As a restaurant manager, you don't ever want to throw food away. So after you throw food away, you have to clean potentially contaminated equipment and utensils, retrain, coach the employees or food handlers who are not following correct procedures. Next subject is hand antiseptics. I'm sure you're all familiar with these. The liquid or gel that's used to lower the number of pathogens on the skin. If you use them in your food service operation, they have to comply with the CFR and Food and Drug Administration standards. This is the important point. These are only used after you wash your hands. They are never used in place of washing your hands. And then your hands should be allowed to dry before touching food or equipment. So it should air dry. It's not something that you would towel dry. Okay, speaking of hands, requirements for food handlers. Keep your fingernails short and clean. Don't wear false nails. And don't wear nail polish. Both the false nails and the nail polish and hide pathogens, dirt, and they can also break off into the food, so they can become biological or physical contaminants. If you have an infected wound or cut, it's possible they contain pus. They have to be covered if they are open or draining. So how the wound is covered depends on where it's located. Usually it's on the hand or finger that we're most concerned about. You want to cover the wounds with an impermeable cover. That means that liquid can't pass between it, so a good quality bandage. There's also something called a finger cock, which is shown here under the glove. In this case, it's blue, like a little balloon. You just roll over your finger, and it keeps moisture from coming in contact with it. But then, on top of that, you have to wear your single-use glove. So whether it's a Band-Aid, bandage, finger cut, you still have to wear a glove over it. On the arm, cover the wounds with a bandage. Other parts of the body, a dry, tight-fitting bandage. Okay, so bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food. Never handle ready-to-eat food with bare hands when you primarily serve a high-risk population. So if you are working in a daycare center, nursing home, a hospital, Any of those places where the patients or guests are high risk, um, avoid bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food unless the food is an ingredient in a dish that does not contain raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and it will be cooked to at least 145 degrees. So if you're chopping celery to go into a broth, you don't have to be wearing gloves for that. If food is an ingredient in a dish that does contain raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and then the dish is going to be cooked to the required minimum internal temperature of the raw items. So if you're adding something to poultry, you have to wear your gloves when you're handling meat, seafood, or poultry, but if you're adding like a chopped vegetable or something to it, when you cook with it, you don't have to be wearing a glove. So the types of gloves that we use are called single-use gloves. And we use them just for one job, take them off, throw them away, wash your hands, and put on another pair. So they're never used in place of hand washing. So you don't just walk into a kitchen and put on a pair of gloves. You always have to wash your hands before every set of gloves. They should be used when handling ready-to-eat food. Because you might have to go from job to job. And the celery that you're chopping up might be used for a salad or it might be used in a soup. So it's just easier to wear a glove. An exception is when you're washing produce. You don't have to wear gloves if you're washing stalks of celery or heads of lettuce. Or, as we said earlier, if you're handling ready-to-eat ingredients that are going to be cooked. What type of gloves to buy? You'll buy them from the same people that sell you your food, because they'll have gloves designed for the food service industry. They're disposable, one-time use, and throw away. You need to have multiple sizes because everybody's going to have a different size that is comfortable for them to wear. Typically, these gloves are latex gloves. And it's not uncommon for people to have allergies to latex. So you need an alternate to latex for the people that will have allergies. Okay, so how we use these, always wash your hands before you put on a new set of gloves. Select the correct glove size. Hold gloves by the edge when putting them on. Once they are on, check for rips or tears. Depending on who the supplier is, sometimes they're really cheap and then they're going to tear, like you're putting on like a Kleenex or something on your hand. They're really, really bad for that. Never blow into gloves. Some people are tempted to do that to help warm up the latex and make it stretchy so it's going to fit over their hands, but you contaminate them whenever you do that. Never roll gloves to make them easier to put on. And kind of idea, you're going to damage the gloves and possibly contaminate them. Never wash and reuse gloves. When do we change these? It's pretty much common sense. As soon as they become dirty or torn, before you begin a different task. After an interruption, such as taking a phone call, usually what you should do is if you get a phone call, take the gloves off, answer the phone, disconnect from the phone, wash your hands, new set of gloves. After handling raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and before handling ready-to-eat food. After 4 hours of continuous use. So if your job is like rolling meatballs for 8 hours a day, You'll get a break after 4 hours, so you have to take your clothes off then. You can't wear them more than 4 hours of continuous use. Uh, I don't know anybody that could wear the same set of gloves for more than 30 minutes because it's really difficult and uncomfortable. Okay, other good personal hygiene practices. The managers have to make sure that staff shower or bathe before coming to work. Set up a dress code. Make sure the staff follows the dress code. So you're going to have uniforms in your operation to make sure the staff is wearing the correct uniform. Food handlers have to wear hair restraints. So even if they have a head of hair like me, you still have to wear a hat. The beards, it used to be that it was only in a food manufacturing facility that you had to wear a beard guard. My understanding is the health department is reinforcing that more in regular restaurant kitchens these days. They have to wear a clean hat or other hair restraints in a food prep area. Do not wear hair accessories that could become physical contaminants. So any type of clips or decorations or whatever you might be putting in your hair, they could fall out. You want to avoid wearing that. Do not wear false eyelashes. I'll talk about the beard restraints. Food handlers have to wear clean clothing. So every day you have to come in a clean uniform. Change your uniforms, including aprons, whenever they are soiled. So it could happen that while you're working, you spill something on your apron. If it's a minor spill, they usually have 4-fold aprons, which is one sheet of cloth with the ties in the center of it. So you have a front, a back, and then the inside. So that's 4 different sides. If you have minor spill, if you have a major spill, you need a new apron. Change into your clothes at work. So you don't want to wear your uniforms during your commute to work. There should be a changing room at the place of work. Store street clothing and personal belongings in designated areas. So in that changing room, the employer should have lockers available, people to put their personal belongings in. Keep dirty clothing away from food and food prep areas. So in that changing room, there should be a container for the employees to put their dirty uniforms if the restaurant washes them, or everybody's going to have to bring like their own uniform bag and take them home and wash them. Aprons have to be handled correctly. Before you leave a food prep area or a kitchen, you make sure you take off your apron. You don't want to take it outside of the kitchen and get it contaminated. Never take your aprons into the restrooms. There is no place in the restroom that you could consider to be sanitary. Never wipe your hands on your apron. This is the big thing. Because most people are going to wipe their hands on the apron, that's why one of the reasons you don't take them out of the kitchen. Food handlers must not wear jewelry, so it has to be removed from hands and arms before prepping food or when working around food prep areas. So you want to remove any type of ring except for a plain band ring. They'll let you wear a plain band ring because there's really nowhere for food to stay in there that you can't easily clean it out. You can't wear bracelets or even medical bracelets. If you do have a medical condition, you need to let your employer know what your condition is, so that in the event of an emergency, um, that they'll know what to do. No watches on the wrists. Remove other jewelry as required by our company. I know for the school, we have a policy of no visible piercing while you're in the kitchen. Eating, drinking, smoking has to be in a designated area. So there's usually a employee break room, employee dining room, where employees can go eat and drink. Food handlers never eat, drink, smoke, or chew gum or tobacco whenever they're prepping or serving food. Whenever you're working in a food prep area, working in areas that are used to clean utensils and equipment. Some exceptions, you may drink from a correctly covered container. So shown in the photograph, correctly covered container has a lid and a straw or a sip top, sip lid top. You have to store that someplace where it's not going to fall or spill onto a food contact surface. So usually it's stored under your workstation. Part of the job of a chef is to taste food as you're making it, to make sure that it tastes the way that you mean for it to taste. So typically we have disposable tasting spoons, eating kind of spoons, or just regular disposable plastic spoons. It's a one-time thing. You taste with it and throw it away. Make sure you use it only once. So you don't want to do the double dip. Reporting health issues. Talked about the major illnesses. You have to tell your staff to let you know when they are sick. Be prepared to show proof that you have done this. And the easiest way to do that is to have a signed statement. So whenever you hire a new person, that would be part of your employment paperwork. Employee agrees to call and notify the manager as soon as possible that they have symptoms of a foodborne illness. Documentation showing staff has completed training, including the importance of reporting illness. Posted signs in the workplace, again reminding staff to notify the managers. If the employee is sick, they have to know to report it instead of coming into work and saying, I'm sick today. Or if they get sick while they're working, they need to know that they need to report that. Also, if they or someone they live with have been diagnosed with an illness from one of these pathogens, and these are the big 6 pathogens. So the 2 viruses, norovirus and hepatitis A, and then the 4 bacteria, we have Shigella, E. coli, and then the 2 salmonellas, Salmonella typhi and non-typhoidal salmonella. I'm pretty sure when you take a lab here, your syllabus is going to tell you all of this in it again. So when food handlers are sick, you may need to restrict them from working with exposed food utensils and equipment. They may work in other areas. So if you have like a hotel and there are more jobs to do than working with food, and people with certain symptoms may be allowed to work at another area in the building. But you will have to exclude them from coming into the operation, especially if they have vomiting, diarrhea, jaundice, sore throat with a fever, an infected wound or boil that is opened or draining unless it's properly covered. So managers need to watch out for signs that an employee has an illness that they're not telling you about. So vomiting, excessive trips to the restroom, yellowing of the skin, eyes, and fingernails, cold sweats or chills, indicating that they might have a fever, persistent nasal discharge and sneezing. So when it comes to deciding whether you're going to restrict somebody to a certain area away from food or exclude them from the property altogether, if a food handler has an infected wound or boil, restrict them from working with exposed food utensils and equipment. If a food handler has a sore throat with fever, same thing, restrict them from working around food. However, if you're working in a with a high-risk population, then you don't let that person come to the building. And then in either case, they need a written release from their medical practitioner before they can come back to working with food. If the food handler has persistent sneezing, coughing, running nose with discharges from the eyes, nose, or mouth, they can be in the building but not working with food. Food handler has at least one of these symptoms from an infectious condition, vomiting, diarrhea, or jaundice. Exclude the food handler from the operation. For vomiting or diarrhea, they need at least to be 24 hours symptom-free or a written release from their doctor. In the event of jaundice, the food handler has to be reported to the regulatory agency, the local health department. They cannot be in the building for at least 7 days after the symptoms appear. Before they can return to work, food handlers have to have two things. They have a written release from their doctor and approval from the health department. Okay. If the food handler has vomiting or diarrhea and is diagnosed with one of the big six pathogens, they need to be excluded from the operation. You have to report that situation to the regulatory authority and then work with that employee's medical practitioner and the health department to determine when that person can come back to work. Okay, so that's chapter 3, and we have some time. I want to go over a review that I have up on Moodle. Can y'all read that in the back? Okay, so we're going to take this review quiz as a class here and see how we do. So, which food item has been associated with Salmonella typhi? Beverages, produce, shellfish from contaminated water, undercooked ground beef. Anybody have an answer? Just say it. Shellfish from contaminated water. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. We'll put that. What practice can help prevent allergic reactions? Cooking different food types in the same oil, identifying ingredients for customers, providing home delivery service, using parchment paper when baking cookies. B. Which symptom can indicate a customer is having an allergic reaction? Wheezing or shortness of breath, left arm pain, appetite loss, coughing blood. A. Where should a food handler wash his or her hands after prepping food? 3-compartment sink, a utility sink, designated sink for hand washing, or food prep sink. Okay. This is the most important tool you can use to prevent time temperature abuse. A good employee, a good manager, thermometer, a timer. B, C. Okay. What should food handlers do after prepping food and before using the restroom? I'm sorry, which letter? D, B, D, C, C. Okay. When should a food handler with sore throat and fever be excluded from the operation? Okay, I'm not even reading them all. Food handler comes to work with diarrhea. What should the manager tell the food handler to do? Bus tables, clean the restroom after each use, go home. You do not work with food. I'm not hearing anything. C. They agree with C. Okay. What should a food handler do to make gloves easier to put on? Select the correct size, roll the gloves up, blow into the gloves, sprinkle flour into the gloves. Okay. When can a food handler diagnosed with jaundice return to work? Which item is a potential physical contaminant? I'm sorry. D as in mold. What's the purpose of hand antiseptic? What symptoms require a food handler to be excluded from the operation? What should food handlers do after leaving and returning to the prep area? I'm sorry, which one? D. Which organization includes inspecting food as one of its primary responsibility? D. What strategy can prevent cross-contamination? C. A. A. Okay, how many think A? B. C. D. An example of a physical contamination. A. Local nursing home has a yearly barbecue for its residents. Which food items should not be served? C. Of the big six pathogens, 4 are bacteria, and those 4 are which one? B. What must a food handler with an effective handling do to work safely with food? D. No. What condition promotes the growth of bacteria? Five common food handling mistakes that can cause foodborne illness: practicing poor personal hygiene, holding food at incorrect temperatures, purchasing food from unsafe sources, and what must food handlers do when handling ready-to-eat food? Farms. Parasites are commonly associated with which food? When must food handler change gloves? What should a server do when taking a food order from customers who have concerns about food allergies? See? So the fecal oral route of contamination is when okay, so see how we did. Okay, we missed 3. So which food item has been associated with Salmonella typhi? We answered shellfish from contaminated water, and the correct answer is A, beverages. Salmonella typhi comes from somebody who has the illness of typhoid fever. So it's going to be yeah, it's going to be connected to ready-to-eat foods. Should food handlers do after prepping food and before using the restroom? The correct answer is take off their aprons. Okay, because they're going to leave the kitchen and use the restroom. They want to take off their aprons. Washing their hands and putting on a new pair of gloves is not correct. And then explore number 16. What strategy can prevent cross-contamination? The correct answer is B. Buy food that does not require prepping. Things that are like, pre-washed, pre-cut salad greens. There's less chance of getting cross-contamination when you don't have to take your lettuce out and use a cutting board to cut it. Okay, that's it for chapter 3, and we will be back here on Monday.